Welcome to Pachehra Talks. My name is Arun and I'm Solutions Architect with Novintech. Novintech is one of the best organizations to work with and also received many Great Place to Work awards. But today we are going to discuss securing Azure SQL DB in our security specialist series. As we have stated many times, we are focusing from security perspective. We are not creating like a general videos for everything. Like we have those kind of uh, you know training or tutorials where they're talking same thing, whether it's architecture or 305 or whether it's administration or networking and security. They just pick the topic and talk the same thing. But here we are just trying to describe everything from the security perspective to cover the topics from security specialist AZ 500. Why I'm saying all that? Because there is a gap of couple of days. I had to go to the uh, office. There was some urgent work, but now I'm back. I'll get some time and I'll start working on these videos as I get some time to work upon. Anyways, enough of the talk. Let's get back to the topic. Securing Azure SQL DB. We secured Azure App Services in the previous video, but today it's all about Azure SQL Database, which is a PaaS service. Just to grasp the concept, I've created little diagram here just to understand. This is our Azure subscription in blue color. As we know, Azure is a blue color. Then we have created one virtual network. There's a subnet in Azure subscription. We do understand Azure SQL DB is a PaaS service. It is not a part of a virtual network. It has its own public IPs, not IPs, service tag, if you remember. So that's how it is, right? And now we have to secure Azure SQL, or rather, we have to see different ways we can secure it. Now, this makes little clarity. This will bring you some clarity how it is not a part of virtual network, but we can make it part of virtual network, right? So all the PaaS services, as we talked about in the previous videos, get some kind of firewall, right? Network restrictions, firewall, or network rule, you could say. So let us call it network restriction. Let me write it down. Network restriction. So which means you can restrict the IPs or the source which is trying to access the SQL database. You can restrict and allow. We'll show you that this kind of service, this kind of network firewall is there in every PaaS services. So we will utilize Azure SQL database firewalls to restrict access to our databases. We'll set server level and database level firewall rules to allow connections only from a specific IP address or range of addresses. Even we have the options like only allow the Azure services to talk to SQL DB from these network restrictions. But the ideal way is not this. Ideal way is to make it absolutely private. And how can we do that? We can utilize private endpoint, by which we can hook it up with our virtual network. So let's suppose this is our private network. Right, this is our private endpoint now. So when we enable the private endpoint, this will get private IP from the subnet and it will become a part of a virtual network. And virtual network is an isolated private network for you, right? So it is already private. So all right, private endpoint. We do have another option, service endpoint, but private endpoint is more secure than service endpoint. However, there are policies that we can apply on the service endpoint, but private endpoint is recommended. So we'll implement private endpoint to isolate the network layer and ensure that our database is only accessible from our virtual network. All right, so this is network. I'll write it down. Network level security. We got two options here that we discussed. We have network firewall. By default, it is there in all the past services. With the help of private endpoint, we can make sure that this database is only accessible through the virtual network, and we can block everything. Okay, very nice. Now, the second thing is we can have, because whenever we have Azure subscription, we need to hook it up with something called, why I'm doing this, let me do this, something called Azure AD Enter ID. Azure Enter ID. Okay. So there is a link between the Azure subscription and Enter ID tenant, so that only users belongs to this Azure ID can have the access to these Azure subscription and these resources, which simply means we can have RBAC implemented for the people through least access privileged principle. Least access privileged principle. Whenever our admins or cloud engineers are accessing these resources via Azure, RBAC is applied with LAPP, least access privilege principle. Nobody call it LAPP. I just write it down. It's least access privilege principle. All right. But we can also utilize Azure Active Directory to get the access to the database. Yes, you are hearing me correctly, to the database as well. We can integrate Azure Enter ID. Now, what would happen? We can, with this integration for managing database access, it supports single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, providing more secure and convenient authentication method than SQL authentication, right? Single point of authority for the authentication and all those advanced feature of security on identity layer you can leverage from Azure Enter ID. So these two options, RBAC and Azure AD, will help us under authentication and authorization security. Okay, very nice. Now the access is secured, network access is secured. Now what we have inside the database, we have data, right? So what we can do for the data, there is an option of TDE, which is transparent data encryption. By default, it is there and you can enable it. By enabling TDE, we can make sure the data at rest is encrypted. Encryption at rest. Okay. And this will protect your data files, log files, and backups from unauthorized access. And then this is at rest only, but we do not only want to protect the data at rest, we also want to protect the data at transit or in use. So what we can do, we can, now we are getting in the database. It's not the Azure feature we're talking, always encryption that you can utilize. Use always encrypted for sensitive data to ensure that data remains encrypted in transit, in use, and at rest if it is always encrypted. This feature allows client to encrypt sensitive data inside client applications and never reveal the encryption keys to the database engine, right? But this thing, when you implement always encryption, there is, you need to check, you need to have your application as such which can actually work with this. So at rest and in transit, in memory is all done. It also provides one more feature which is called dynamic data masking. Yes, dynamic data masking, DDM. And what it does, it wears mask, not the holy mask like people are wearing during our festival, Holi. But this one is going to prevent unauthorized user to see the sensitive data, because implementing DDM to hide sensitive data in query results. So this is internal. It's useful for scenarios where certain users should not have access to the full data but still need to work with the database. For example, credit card details. All 60 numbers are not visible, only the last four digit, rest would be XXX or things like that. Or maybe mobile number where you have only one or two digit visible and rest is XXX, things like that. It is masked. It is internal. This is not for the customer, for internal users. So that's how we can protect the data. Now there is this feature is Azure feature, which is threat detecting, and which is via Defender, right? So we can activate Azure Defender for SQL, Defender for SQL to get advanced threat detection capabilities. This is security service that we are opting for. Microsoft Defender for SQL or Azure Defender for SQL. It provides alerts on anomalous activities that could indicate potential security threats, including SQL injection attacks and abnormal database access patterns. So just like we deploy antivirus, anti-malware, things like that, this is just for the people who are the newbies and not hard into security. Similarly, we are opting for Defender for SQL for the SQL database, where it will go and apply the advanced threat detection capabilities. You know? And it provides alerts for those activities which are anomalous or abnormal data access patterns. So a lot more features are there in Data Defender for SQL. Then of course, we logging is something very important for everything, especially for the security. So audit logs. We got to enable audit log to retain the audit trail of selected events. These audit logs, we can use it to monitor database activities and investigate security incidents. Logs can be stored in Azure storage, streamed to event hubs, or sent to log analytics for analysis as well. So enable the audit logs from security perspective. Now, who is accessing, how they are accessing, secured, the data inside database is secured, something happening to the data is secured through Defender. Now, uh, through audit logs, we can figure out what is happening and secure it. And if something happened, these logs will help us to figure it out as well. Now, these there is one more thing which is called vulnerability assessment, just like we have in virtual machines for patching. Reliability assessment. I'm giving these things just to relate, so that you can relate what we are talking here. So even with SQL, we have to perform regular assessments. We can use the Azure SQL database vulnerability assessment tool to perform regular scans of database. It helps identify and mitigate potential database vulnerabilities, DB vulnerabilities. Okay, just like we have vulnerabilities in operating system. So this is database vulnerabilities. We have mentioned least access privilege for the RBAC, but we can also apply principle of least privilege, POLP, principle of least privilege, so that users and applications have the minimum level of access necessary to perform their functions on DB for app and users. And what you need to do, you need to regularly review and adjust permissions to adhere to the principle, because it happens sometimes because of some situation, the more access or rights given and it is still there. So access review is something which is very important. Then you can go a little deeper in the SQL DB, or you can parameterize the queries to protect against SQL injection, ensure your application uses parameterized queries. Okay, now we are getting in the data a little bit. Parameterized queries. Okay, you can also use client client-side encryption. Okay. For highly sensitive data, consider encrypting data on the client side before it is sent to the database, which will again help you, like always, encryption. And finally, we have if something happens, how could you recover, which is backup NDR. You never forget about backup NDR, which is BCDR, Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery Plan. And the good thing is Azure SQL Database automatically performs backups, right? It is there, automatic backups. Ensure that the backup and retention policies meet your organization's need. And of course, you'll find better options for the DR, like geo replication and failover groups. Okay, it is there. You need not to work from the scratch because it's a PaaS service. You have the options. You can simply utilize those options, but you should know how to implement this for your organization requirement. So use active geo-replication or auto-failover groups for HA or high availability or DR. This ensures your databases remain available even in the case of regional outage. So it is not like you're running to separate database, but you can also utilize, if you're using right SKUs, the read only, and you can divert the read only queries to that particular uh, database of yours. So that's how you can make it highly available. Finally, we gotta set up monitoring and alerting to quickly respond to potential security incidents. Azure Monitor and Azure SQL Analytics are powerful tools for getting insights into your database health and activity. So monitoring and alerts. So with all these things, we can for sure make our database secure from all different layers, from different perspectives, and run a secured application. With this, let me close this video and thank you for watching. In the next video, we'll try to talk about a new topic. Thank you for watching. You guys have a wonderful day. I hope it was helpful.